Welcome to the Hearth of Hymonia. Today we're continuing our discussions about the witch Medea from Greek and Roman literature and the broader story that her story is contained in, Jason and the Argonauts. This is the second video in our series, so if you missed the first one, I will link it up above and in the description. Last time we introduced the myth, its plot, and some of its sources, and we talked about the precipitating event in the story, which is the curse that Medea is under that makes her fall in love, again, not really, with Jason, and causes her to help him and in doing so betray her family and her country and end up in a really bad spot. It was kind of a bummer video, and I did promise more fun things, and today that's exactly what we're doing. Today's topic is prophecy. Prophecy is common in Greek and Roman myth. There's no question about it. But in this myth, it just permeates the entire thing. There's so many different characters who engage with prophecy, actually give prophecies or interpret signs. In fact, the precipitating event for Jason's quest to go and get the golden fleece back from Colchis is a prophecy that Pelaius receives, or at least claims to have received, that he will be overthrown by a man with one sandal. And when Jason makes his way back to Iolcus, he loses one of his sandals. So he shows up and he has one sandal, and Pelaius understands that this is the man that is supposed to overthrow him, and so he sends him away on what he believes will be an impossible quest. But there are prophecies all throughout the myth across many different sources and at different stages of their journey. So we're going to look at some of those examples today. This will also be an excuse to talk about Medea's family tree. You'll see why as we go. And my hope is to be able to put a guide on the website to Medea's family tree and also Jason's family tree. I suspect that won't be done by the time this video is posted, but hopefully by the time the next one is posted. So be on the lookout. I'll let you know when that is done, or if it's done, I will be indicating it to you now on the screen. But on the website, you can find the source guide for this myth. So not even really every source that covers this myth, but every major source that covers this myth, I made a little study guide for that. So that is also linked in the description. Today's topic is a big one, so let's jump right into it and start looking at the examples of prophecy in the story of Jason and Medea. Prophecy in the ancient world is a form of mediation between the world of the divine, the gods, and the human realm. People who deliver prophecies are not like other people. They are usually mortal. You could call them ordinary humans, except that there's something different about them. They have some kind of direct link to the gods. And they are able almost to translate divine will or divine speech into human language so that humans can understand it. Sometimes they present as themselves, say, I am the prophet Tiresias and I am telling you what the god told me. And sometimes they are directly possessed by the god and they're a direct conduit where the god is using their mouth as a megaphone almost. And the prophet themselves doesn't really have anything to do with it. Their body is being used by the god. A really clear example of this comes from the Aeneid. In Book 6, Aeneas travels to Cumae, and he has heard that there's a Sibyl there who can help him figure out what he's supposed to do next. And she delivers a prophecy to him from Apollo. And I'll read you what Virgil writes. I'm reading from the always excellent Lombardo translation here. So Virgil says, "But the priestess had not yet taken Apollo's bit in her mouth, and she convulsed like a Maenad, monstrous in the cave, desperate to shake the great god from her breast. All the more, though, he tired her rabid mouth, tamed her wild heart, and molded her to his will. And now the cave's 100 mouths opened of their own accord and transmitted the oracle's response through the empty air." And then she delivers the prophecy. And then after she delivers the prophecy, Virgil continues, "In words such as these, the Sibyl of Cumae chanted eerie riddles from her shrine in the echoing cave, shrouding truth in darkness, as Apollo shook the reins and twisted the goad in her raving heart. As soon as her frenzy ceased, and her lips were hushed, the Trojan hero began." And then Aeneas starts speaking to her. So there is a link between prophets, seers, and the gods. Sometimes it's direct, like we just heard. Sometimes it's less direct. Now, an interesting sidestep from this that is nevertheless very important to understand is that professional seers, as in people who primarily work as priests in divination temples or sort of wandering prophets who give prophecies to the gods, these people are not the only ones with a specific linguistic connection to the divine. The other category of people that have this special relationship with the gods are poets, bards, singers. And this is important in our story, and it's also important because as we move into the Roman period, the distinction between these two categories collapses. Poets begin to refer to themselves using the Latin term vates, which means both bard, singer, poet, and also seer, prophet, diviner. And although this terminology is late, the sentiment of this can be seen from the very beginnings of Greek literature. In the beginning of Hesiod's Theogony, Hesiod describes his personal relationship with the goddesses of arts and poetic inspiration, among other things, the Muses. And the Muses, of course, are led by Apollo, so there's a connection to prophecy right away. This is what Hesiod says about his relationship with the Muses. Quote, "And one day they taught Hesiod glorious song while he was shepherding his lambs under holy Helicon. And this word first, the goddesses said to me, the Muses of Olympus, daughters of Zeus who hold the aegis. Shepherds of the wilderness, wretched things of shame, mere bellies, we know how to speak many false things as though they were true, but we know, when we will, to utter true things." And he goes on to describe how they, quote, "breathed into me a divine voice to celebrate things that shall be, and things that were aforetime. And they bade me sing of the race of the blessed gods that are eternally, but ever to sing of themselves both first and last." And finally, he explains clearly, quote, "For it is through the Muses and far-shooting Apollo that there are singers and harpers upon the earth." So in Hesiod's description, the Muses actually breathe into the poet, the singer, to give him the words that he is supposed to sing. Like the Sibyl of Cumae, he is a direct conduit that is translating divine speech into human speech. And the most famous prophet in Greek mythology is Tiresias. Tiresias appears in two stories, the Oedipus story and in the Odyssey. In the Oedipus story, he is just a local prophet that is consulted about important matters. And so as the city is taken over by plague, plagues come from the gods, and so it would make sense to consult Tiresias to ask him, what are the gods saying about this? Which god is upset? What do we need to do to rectify this situation? So they call Tiresias, and Tiresias comes to talk to Oedipus. Now, of course, he has to deliver the news to Oedipus that he has fulfilled a more ancient prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So he has kind of a difficult job to do. But the thing about Tiresias that I think is important to note, most people who engage in prophecy, there is something unusual about them. And in Tiresias' case, he is blind, just like Homer. So again, we have the bards. The tradition says that Homer was blind, and in the Odyssey, blind bards show up as well. They're playing music, but they can't see. So Tiresias is blind, but he has a kind of true sight, if you will. His physical eyes are shrouded in darkness, but his sort of spiritual eyes see the light of the truth of divine will. I hope that makes sense. That is kind of what's going on with Tiresias. And Oedipus addresses him when he arrives, and he says, Tiresias, whose soul grasps all things, both that which may be told and that which is unspeakable, the Olympian secrets in the affairs of the earth, you feel, though you cannot see, what a huge plague haunts our state. And then he asks Tiresias what's going on, and Tiresias says, I'm not going to tell you because I'm afraid you're going to hurt me. They go back and forth. Tiresias tells him what's going on. Oedipus doesn't believe him anyway and banishes him. But the point is, not everyone has direct access to what the gods are thinking and doing. And you need someone who is not an ordinary person. There's just something different about these figures. So that's why he is able to translate what the will of the gods is. Now, when he shows up in the Odyssey, he has already died. It's important to understand that prophets are not deities or even supernatural entities. They are human people who die. Tiresias dies by the time the Trojan War happens, and Odysseus needs to get some information from him, so he actually has to go to the entrance to the underworld and do a conjuring spell to bring Tiresias back to get information from him that way. And that's another element of prophecy. If you need your prophet to be a little bit unusual, or there's something not quite typical about your prophet, that thing can be that they are in fact dead. This happens all the time. Dead people give prophecies because they have passed into a different realm. So Aeneas, when he does go into the underworld, guided by the symbol of Kumai, he gets a prophecy from his father. And this kind of thing happens twice in our story. I'm not going to go into these examples in detail just because of time, but there are two ghosts or ghostly figures who give prophecies in the Jason and Medea story. The first is Phrixus. If you remember, this is the ancestor of Jason who brought the fleece to Colchis, married, settled down, became a part of the royal family there, and eventually passed away. His spirit comes to Aeetes, Medea's father, the king of Colchis, and gives him a prophecy. This happens only in Valerius Flaccus, by the way. Gives Aeetes a prophecy that one of his offspring will betray him, essentially. And also in Valerius Flaccus, Phrixus' sister Hele, if you'll remember, she did not make it to Colchis. She slipped off the ram as they were fleeing across the Hellespont, which is named Helle's Pontus. And the assumption is that she died, but it seems, in fact, that she was turned into some kind of water nymph. So she appears to Jason and gives him a prophecy about how he needs to keep on keeping on because things are going to be really bad for a very long time, but his quest will be successful if he just sticks it out. So again, I wish we had time to dive into those a little bit more deeply, but suffice it to say that dead people can give prophecies, and people who are alive give prophecies all the time, but there is something that sets them apart and makes them a little bit different. So let's turn now to some of the prophetic figures that we meet in the Jason and Medea myth. When Jason goes on his quest to get the Golden Fleece back, he assembles a crew of Argonauts to sail the ship Argo to go with him. And 3 members of that crew are prophets. And as we'll see at other points in this series, they are also priestly figures. They can perform rituals. But for today, I just want to talk about their relationship to prophecy. And the first prophet we're going to meet today is Idmon. Idmon is one of the Argonauts. He joins Jason on his quest, and he is allegedly the son of Apollo, although he does have a mortal father as well named Abbas. The rumor is that Abbas is not his biological father, he's just the man who raised him, and he was fathered, in fact, by Apollo. But at any rate, Apollo is the one who taught Idmon prophecy, and specifically, he taught him augury, that is, prophecy by interpreting bird flight. Now, Idmon does the least of the prophets that join Jason on his journey, but Idmon represents what the authors of the Argonautica want to show as like a good and strong character. And they do so through his prophecy, because Idmon joins the Argonaut quest even though he had prophetic knowledge that if he joined the quest, he would die. So in Apollonius's version, Idmon prophesies to Jason that the quest will be successful and that the Argonauts will make it home, but that he himself will not. This is what Apollonius says. Or I should say, this is what Idmon says in Apollonius's Argonautica. He says, quote, "For you, it is the will of heaven and destiny that ye shall return here with the fleece. But meanwhile, both going and returning, countless trials await you. But it is my lot, by the hateful decree of a god, to die somewhere afar off on the mainland of Asia. Thus, though I learned my fate from evil omens even before now, I have left my fatherland to embark on the ship, that so after my embarking fair fame may be left me in my house." And Valerius Flaccus in his Argonautica goes a little bit further. He describes Idmon and he says that he was, quote, "not pale with sickly fear, nor awful to look upon with upstanding hair, but instinct with destiny and the calm influence of Apollo. Idmon prophesied thus to his comrades and to Mopsus. As surely as the seer Apollo and that first tongue of flame teach me, so do I behold all our course full of toil and grievous to be borne. Yet shall the ship with long suffering overcome all things. Great hearts be strong, and struggle forward to the sweet embrace of father and mother." The tears fell as he spoke, for already he divined by the flames that for him Argos was closed forevermore. And just a few lines later, Valerius Flaccus drives the point home. He describes Idmon, sent despite warning omens, but it is shameful for a man to dread the future. So Idmon's prophetic knowledge tells him that he is not going to survive this trip, yet nevertheless he joins them anyway because it is the right thing to do, it is the courageous thing to do, and his hope is that even though he's going to die, the fame of his courage and his assistance on this trip will, I don't want to say make up for it, but that is a very Greek thing, right? Even though I'm going to die, I'm going to become immortal through my posthumous reputation. And we do have the death of Idmon represented across the Argonautica. I'm just going to put them on the screen here rather than reading them. He dies, some say by disease, and some say that he was killed by a wild boar. Moving on now to my favorite prophet in the story, Mopsus. Mopsus has a similar story to Idmon, where he has a human father named Ampicus or Ampex, but he is thought to be the son of Apollo. Valerius Flaccus calls him no empty pledge of the fatherhood of Phoebus. And like Idmon, Mopsus was taught by Apollo the skill of prophecy, and in particular, augury, prophecy using birds. Apollonius says, quote, "There came too Titaresian Mopsus, whom above all men the son of Leto taught the augury of birds." And later he calls him Mopsus, skilled in the seer's art. The Orphic Argonautica backs this up as well, Mopsus who knew of these things by his prophetic art. And of the prophets in this story, Mopsus is the one who does the most augury specifically. He is interpreting birds all of the time. Sometimes we just get a singular line about it. Apollonius says, quote, "And Mopsus heard and understood the cry of the bird on the shore, fraught with good omen." But there are two instances where Mopsus's augury is a little bit more fleshed out in the story itself. So I want to go through these two examples. The first example is when the Argonauts are in Colchis. Jason has been given these tasks by Aeetes, and they're trying to figure out what to do in order to get him through these challenges alive. And the subject of Medea comes up. They're joined along the way by a couple of people from Colchis. Actually, they're Phrixus's children, who are shipwrecked, and so they end up joining the Argonaut crew, and they tell Jason, hey, my cousin is a witch, or my aunt is a witch, and she might be able to help you. It might make sense to try and use her and see if she'll give you some magical protection. And of course, we know that that's what happens. But once this is suggested, there's a sign, a bird sign, that Mopsus interprets. So this is what Apollonius says, quote, "A trembling dove, in her flight from a mighty hawk, fell from on high, terrified, into the lap of Aeson's son. And the hawk fell impaled on the stern ornament. And quickly Mopsus with prophetic words spake among them all, For you, friends, this sign has been wrought by the will of heaven. In no other way is it possible to interpret its meaning better than to seek out the maiden and entreat her with manifold skill. And I think she will not reject our prayer, if in truth Phineus said that our return should be with the help of the Cyprian goddess. It was her gentle bird that escaped death. And as my heart within me foresees according to this omen, so may it prove. But, my friends, let us call on Cytherea to aid us, and now at once obey the counsels of Argus. Argus is Phrixus' son who tells them about Medea. So a dove is being chased by a hawk. The dove escapes from the hawk dies, and the dove falls into Jason's lap. And this dove is sacred to Aphrodite. Now, if you saw the last video, you will know that it is Aphrodite who curses Medea, or, she sends Eros to do it, but it's the same idea. And Medea falls in love. Again, not real love, artificially imposed infatuation with Jason, and that is how she ends up helping. So the fact that Aphrodite's dove comes onto the ship, lands on Jason's lap, you can't get more direct of a sign than that, Mopsus is able to say, oh, this means that we can use the themes of Aphrodite to try and get Medea to help us. And they don't know that she's cursed, they just know that it seems like Aphrodite is willing to help them in this scenario. And the last prophecy from Mopsus that we're going to cover today is another interpretation of birds. And this one is very direct. The birds speak, in fact, to Mopsus, and he can hear them and understand them. But we do get their speech. So this is what Apollonius says. The context for this is that Jason and Medea are getting ready to meet face to face for the first time. They have been in the same room, they've seen each other already, but this is the first time that they are going to meet each other, speak to each other, and Medea is going to offer her help to Jason. This takes place in the grove of the sanctuary that is sacred to Hecate, Medea's patron goddess, we'll say. So Jason's getting ready to enter the sanctuary. He has a few Argonauts with him, although they're not going to follow him all the way in. And this is when Mopsus has a conversation with some birds. So this is what Apollonius says. Now by the path along the plain there stands near the shrine a poplar, with its crown of countless leaves, whereon often chattering crows would roost. One of them, meantime, as she clapped her wings aloft in the branches, uttered the counsels of Hera. So again, I'll interrupt for a second. Mopsus hears the birds speaking what Hera wants. Okay, and this is what the bird says. What a pitiful seer is this, that he has not the wit to conceive even what children know. How that no maiden will say a word of sweetness or love to a youth when strangers be near. Begone, sorry prophet, witless one. On thee neither Cypris nor the gentle loves breathe in their kindness. She spake chiding, and Mopsus smiled to hear the god-sent voice of the bird, and thus addressed them. He's addressing all of the guys that he's with right now. He says, quote, Do thou, son of Aeson, pass on to the temple, where thou wilt find the maiden, and very kind will her greeting be to thee, through the prompting of Cypris, who will be thy helpmate in the contest, even as Phineus, Agenor's son, foretold. But we two, Argus and I, will await thy return, apart in this very spot. Do thou all alone be a suppliant, and win her over with prudent words. So the bird basically says, listen, there's going to be a little bit of a romantic encounter, and you're gonna ruin it by, tagging along. So you and Argus hang out in the back, Jason can go by himself, and then once everything is done, you all can meet up again. Mopsus gives lots more prophecies, but we don't have time to go into them. He helps uncover the cause of a plague. He gives kind of like initial commentary on the success of the voyage in Valerius Flaccus. He interprets the omens of Jason and Medea's eventual wedding. So there's a lot that he does, but it's time for us now to turn to the third and final Argonaut prophet seer. You may have heard of him. His name is Orpheus. Unlike Idmon and Mopsus, Orpheus is not supposed to be the son of Apollo. Instead, he is the son of the muse Calliope and a mortal man. Now, if you don't know Orpheus, Orpheus is a bard. He is a singer, songwriter, kithara player, and his music has magic powers. So he is able to control the natural world with his song, and in his most famous myth, Orpheus and Eurydice, he goes down to the underworld to bring Eurydice back with him, and his music charms Hades and Persephone, which is the only way that he's allowed to bring Eurydice back, is he has to convince them, and he does so through his song. Now these magic powers, and even more magical and, we'll say, ritual ability, is alive for Orpheus in this story, and we will cover it all in future videos in the series. But again, I just want to talk about prophecy today and his relationship to prophecy. He only shows up a little bit in the first two, the very famous Argonauticai of Apollonius and Valerius Flaccus. He basically isn't in Valerius Flaccus at all. He's just mentioned as one of the Argonauts, but he doesn't really do anything. In Apollonius, we hear that his music is guiding the oars. This is how large ships in antiquity were rowed, is, you had all of your rowers lined up, and everybody would row in sync with one another, and the way that you keep in sync is to have some kind of chant or music. So in this case, Orpheus provides that for the sailors as they're rowing. But like I said last time, there are not 2 Argonautica, there are 3 Argonautica. The Orphic Argonautica is a take on this story that is framed through the framework of Orphism, which is a mystery cult, mystery religion, and it's quite a late source. It's from the 5th century CE. And as you might expect, the Orphic Argonautica emphasizes Orpheus's role in the story, again through magic, which we'll get to, and also through prophecy. The Orphic Argonautica begins with a little dissertation about prophecy, both Orpheus himself engaging in prophecy and then what prophecy is in general. So I'm going to read a big chunk of that to you. The very opening lines, he says, quote, and by the way, all of this is told from the perspective of Orpheus himself. So this is how his poem opens. He says, "O powerful lord of Pytho, far-thrower, also a seer, whose place is high atop the Parnassus rock, of your power I sing. In turn, may your gift furnish me with glory, and send your true voice into my mind, so that, by the imposition of the muse, I may disperse a fine song to the numberless races of men with the help of my well-made Cythera." Okay, I want to pause here before I continue. This is a diagram of exactly how prophecy is supposed to work. So let me just read that line again. Send your true voice into my mind. So the divine speech of, in this case, Apollo, Lord of Pytho, send your voice into my mind so that by the imposition of the muse, so again, we're talking about song and poetry here, so that's why the muses show up, so that I may disperse a fine song to the numberless races of men. The divine speech enters the mind of, in this case, the prophet, poet, bard, Wates, and out comes something that humankind can understand. Okay, let's keep going. For now to you, O worker of the lyre, singer of pleasing songs, my spirit rouses me to tell of things of which I have never before spoken, when driven by the goad of Kings Bacchus and Apollo. I describe their terrible shafts, and likewise I disclose the cure for feeble mortal bodies and the great rites to initiates. Truly above all, I disclose the stern inevitability of ancient chaos and time, who in his boundless coils produced ether, and the twofold beautiful and noble Eros, whom the younger men call Phanes, celebrated parent of eternal night, because he himself first manifested. So all of this is Orphic doctrine, and that is not the subject of this video, so I'm just going to breeze right by it. But these are the things that for Orpheus, Apollo has dictated to him, and that he will now dictate out to humans. As Orpheus goes on to describe what his subject matter is and what his subject matter has been in the past, he's addressing the audience, and he talks again about prophecy. So he says, "And also you learned the multitudinous ways of prophesying, from the motion of wild birds, and from the position of entrails. And whatsoever the souls of men prophesy through the ways of interpreting the dreams that pierce the mind in sleep, and the interpretation of these signs and prophecies, and from the motions of the stars." So these are all the different kinds of prophecy that Orpheus is talking about directly. In terms of prophecies that Orpheus actually gives on the journey, there's only 2 in Apollonius's Argonautica, and they're quite small. So the first is in Book 2. The Argonauts end up on an island called Thunias, and Apollo actually appears to the Argonauts. They see him with his bow as like a shadowy figure, and Orpheus immediately interprets this. And so Apollonius says, "And at length Orpheus spake as follows, addressing the chiefs, 'Come, let us call this island the sacred isle of Apollo of the dawn, since he has appeared to all passing by at dawn. So this is an interpretation of a sign. I mean, it's not prophecy in the sense of telling the future, but it is prophecy in the sense of interpreting the divine realm for humans. So that's why I'm including it here. And it's not insignificant that the god in question is Apollo, a god of prophecy and, importantly for Orpheus, a god of music. And then the second prophecy that Orpheus gives, and again, this is an interpretation of signs. The Argonauts are wandering in the deserts of Libya. This is on their way back from Colchis. Medea is with them. And they're in the desert. They're thirsty and they can't find water. But they do run into a serpent that is basically dead. It's on the verge of death. And Orpheus is able to understand that it was killed by Heracles, who has left the journey. He doesn't go all the way to Colchis with them. He just kind of goes part way. So since he left them, he's been off doing his thing, including killing this serpent. And Orpheus also understands that this serpent had been the one that was guarding the apples of the Hesperides in the Garden of Atlas. So the Hesperides and Atlas and Heracles are all involved in this snake. And of course, nobody knows this as they're just looking at the snake. It's Orpheus who is able to say, oh, this sign, I know this is this particular serpent, and this is what happened. And furthermore, Orpheus understands that the Hesperides might just help them find water. So Apollonius says this: Orpheus marked the divine portent, and for his comrades addressed them in prayer. So he's addressing the Hesperides, these goddesses. He says, O divine ones, fair and kind, be gracious, O queens, whether ye be numbered among the heavenly goddesses or those beneath the earth, or be called the solitary nymphs. Come, O nymphs, sacred race of Oceanus, appear manifest to our longing eyes, and show us some spring of water from the rock, or some sacred flow gushing from the earth. Goddesses, wherewith we may quench the thirst that burns us unceasingly. And if ever again we return in our voyaging to the Achaean land, then to you among the first of goddesses, with willing hearts, will we bring countless gifts, libations, and banquets. And the Hesperides respond to Orpheus and make an oasis for the Argonauts to quench their thirst so that they can continue on their journey. So those three Argonauts, Idmon, Mopsus, and Orpheus, are present with the rest of the crew on this journey so that they can have interpreters of the divine helping them along the way. Their prophecies, and as we'll see later, their rituals help guide Jason and the Argonauts to Colchis to complete their quest. I want to turn now to Medea's side of the story, Medea and her family and their relationship to prophecy. This is an excuse to give a little bit of overview of Medea's family tree, although we're running a little bit long here already, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. But in order to understand prophecy in Medea's family, we need to know that Medea's grandfather, Aeetes' father, is the sun god Helios. You may be thinking of another sun god who has a connection to prophecy. But Helios specifically has a relationship to prophecy that is a little bit different from Apollo's. Apollo has the oracle at Delphi. He is able to kind of possess people or divinely inspire them to give them sacred speech to deliver to humans. Helios's relationship to prophecy is in his capacity as a sun god, because the sun was described as all-seeing. The image of knowledge and truth as the kind of light, and ignorance as darkness, right? In the dark, you can't see what's going on, but in the light, especially the brightest light that there is, the light of the sun, you can see everything. So Helios is an all-seeing sun god, and he is able to interpret things, and he sees everything that goes on. The clearest example of this is in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, where Helios is the one who sees Hades take Persephone down to the underworld. And when his relative, Hecate, comes and asks, have you seen Persephone? Do you know what happened to her? Helios did in fact see, because he sees everything. And Helios has children and relatives, including his son, Aeetes, Medea's father. Now, just a note about the rest of her family tree. Although the sources differ, basically the most common version of the family tree is that Helios had both Aeetes, his son, and also Circe, his daughter. This is the same Circe from the Odyssey. We meet her at the end of Apollonius's Argonautica, and we'll talk about her in this video. And they are also related to Hecate, the goddess of magic and witchcraft, among many, many other things. And how she's related to all of them changes depending on what source you read. Again, I'm going to try and put together a family tree guide for the website. I think that'll be easier than trying to walk through it. But the point is that this is a very magically inclined family and a very prophetically inclined family. So we see Aeetes doing prophecy. We see Circe foreknowing certain things. And in Pindar, we see Medea herself giving a prophecy to the Argonauts. So beginning with Aeetes. Aeetes receives a prophecy in both Apollonius's Argonautica and in Valerius Flaccus's Argonautica, but they're different, so we'll take them one at a time. I'll read to you first from Apollonius. He says, quote, "For once he, Aeetes, had heard a baleful prophecy from his father Helios, that he must avoid the secret treachery and schemes of his own offspring and their crafty mischief. Wherefore he was sending them as they desired to the Achaean land at the bidding of their father, a long journey, nor had he ever so slight a fear of his daughters, that they would form some hateful scheme, nor of his son Absyrtus, but this curse was being fulfilled in the children of Chalciope. And he proclaimed terrible things in his rage against the strangers, and loudly threatened to keep watch over the ship and its crew, so that no one might escape calamity." The context for the prophecy that Aeetes receives is, like I said, the Argonauts pick up a few extra crew members when they get near to Colchis, and they turn out to be the sons of Phrixus, Jason's ancestor, so it makes them kin to Jason, but their mother is Chalciope, Aeetes' daughter, Medea's sister. So they have a connection to both. And they are the ones that speak to Aeetes on behalf of the Argonauts because of their pre-existing relationship. And they say, hey, we just want to introduce you to some people that showed up on our shore. And by the way, they're trying to take our fleece, but they're really good guys and you should give it to them anyway. And then we hear about this prophecy and why they had been away from Colchis in the first place. And what had happened is that Aeetes received a prophecy that he should beware treachery from his offspring. And he said, well, surely it's not my daughters, and surely it's not my younger son, Absyrtus, so it must be the children of Phrixus and Chalciope. So he sends them away, but they get shipwrecked and they end up right back in Colchis. And Aeetes believes that they are the ones that are going to do him in. But in fact, we know that the offspring that betrays him is who? It's Medea. But Aeetes doesn't know this. He receives a prophecy from Helios and he interprets it incorrectly. So because Aeetes has a special relationship with Helios, namely that Helios is in fact his father, he is able to get prophecy from him. Now, Aeetes' unstable emotional state allows him to interpret things incorrectly, but he does receive the prophecy, and he's the one that describes the prophecy to the people of Colchis. He says it out loud. Now, in Valerius Flaccus, the prophecy shows up to Aeetes a little bit differently. Aeetes receives a dream prophecy from Phrixus himself. Now, again, Phrixus has died. Dead people can give prophecies. And Phrixus gives a very similar prophecy to Aeetes, although he's more specific in which of his offspring he needs to watch out for. So this is what Valerius Flaccus says. Quote, "Once too did he appear, Phrixus, a vast phantom in the silent hours of night, and a great voice spoke forth and struck terror into the father of his bride. O thou who didst suffer me, a fugitive from my native land in search of home, to settle in these abodes, and soon, offering thy daughter, invited me to be thy son-in-law. Dolor and ruin of thy realm shall abound for thee, what time the fleece is stolen from the sleep-drugged grove. Moreover, Medea, who is now consecrated to Diana of the underworld, that would be Hecate, and leads the holy dance. Let her look for betrothal to any suitor. Suffer her not to abide in her father's kingdom." So Phrixus warns Aeetes about the fleece, and then Aeetes prays to Helios, who sends the serpent which settles down in the grove of Mars to protect the fleece. So Medea's father, through his own father, has this prophetic knowledge. And like I said, other members of the family do as well. We meet Circe at the end of Apollonius's Argonautica, after the Argonauts have left Colchis with Medea in tow, and they're having a really bad time, and they end up on Circe's island. And Circe herself, before the Argonauts even arrive, understands what the situation is that they're in. And the situation that they're in is that they have killed Medea's younger brother Apsyrtus, who, again, in some sources is a little bit older, but in other sources could be, like a tween. But they kill Apsyrtus, and it's not a legitimate murder. Like, there's no good reason to kill Apsyrtus, at least in the eyes of divine law. So the Argonauts are constantly running into problems on their trip home because they have incurred ritual impurity. And Circe knows all of this ahead of time because she had a terrible dream that she interprets and understands what's going on. And when the Argonauts arrive, she takes one look at them and says, "Oh, you are definitely ritually impure. You're going to have to purify yourself immediately before A, I want anything to do with you, and B, before you can do anything that you are trying to accomplish." So Circe's dream is this. With blood her chambers and all of the walls of her palace seemed to be running, and flame was devouring all the magic herbs which she used to bewitch strangers whoever came. And she herself, with murderous blood, quenched the glowing flame, drawing it up in her hands, and she ceased from deadly fear. And then later, when the Argonauts show up, Apollonius says, "And straightway Circe became aware of the doom of a suppliant and the guilt of murder." And even though Medea doesn't want to tell her what happened, Circe knows anyway. He says, "But she shrank," this is Medea, "but she shrank from the telling of the murder of Apsyrtus. Yet she escaped not Circe's ken." So Circe knows what's up. You cannot hide from Circe because she has that foreknowledge, and she has the ability to interpret spiritual matters. And again, she prescribes them an expiation ritual. And the whole thing is summarized more succinctly in the Orphic Argonautica. So this is what that poem says, quote, "With her eye she caught sight of Medea, wrapped in a garment as though the veil would cover her pallor and her shame and the aching of her heart. Feeling pity for her, she spoke to her with these words. O unfortunate, unfortunate one, what terrible fate has Cypris thrust upon you?" So Circe also knows about the curse that Aphrodite has put on her. "It does not escape me that you come to my island polluted with crime against your old father and your brother, whom I am astounded to adduce you killed. Therefore I adjudge that you shall not return to your native shores until you atone for this crime." So very direct. Circe looks at Medea and immediately is able to tell, 1, that she has been cursed by Aphrodite, and 2, that she has committed unholy murder against her own brother, and that they need to perform this expiation ritual. And we will cover the ritual, don't worry, but it's going to be in another video. Before that, though, and to close out this video, we have to talk about Medea herself as a prophet. The clear-cut example of Medea performing prophecy is Pindar's Pythian Ode. This poem is a lyric victory ode that is dedicated to the winner of a chariot race. In fact, not the athlete himself, but the sponsor of that chariot, a guy named Argonauts. Now, the main goal of this poem, which Pindar uses the story of Jason and Medea to accomplish, the goal is to describe that the colony of Cyrene, which is a colony or an apoikia of the city of Thera, which is in Greece, Cyrene is in, Libya, that the founding and the colonization of Cyrene was prophesied. And there are 2 prophecies that happen in the first couple of lines. One comes from the Pythia by means of Apollo, who prophesies the founding of Cyrene by a guy named Batus, who is the ancestor of Arcesilaus. But Pindar says that that prophecy was actually the fulfillment of an earlier prophecy given by Medea, 17 generations earlier to be exact, on Thera, where she interprets a divine sign and gives this prophecy that Thera will one day give a colony in Africa, and that it's supposed to happen in the 4th generation, but that the Argonauts kind of messed it up, so it got delayed to the 17th generation, and that's when the Pythia of Apollo gives the prophecy about Batus. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the beginning of this poem, and Medea's prophecy is really, really, really long. I'm only going to read the beginning of it, and then we'll talk about what happens in the rest of it. So Pindar begins in this way. Today you must stand beside a beloved man, Muse, the king of Cyrene with his fine horses, so that while Arcesilaus celebrates his triumph, you may swell the fair wind of song that is due to the children of Leto and to Pytho, where once the priestess seated beside the golden eagles of Zeus, on a day when Apollo happened to be present, gave an oracle naming Batus as the colonizer of fruitful Libya, and telling how he would at once leave the holy island and found a city of fine chariots on a shining white breast of the earth, and carry out in the 17th generation the words spoken at Thera by Medea, which once the inspired daughter of Aeetes, the queen of the Colchians, breathed forth from her immortal mouth. She spoke in this way to the heroes who sailed with the warrior Jason. Hear me, sons of high-spirited men and of gods, for I say that from this wave-washed land one day the daughters of Epaphus will have planted in her a root of cities that are dear to men, in the temple of Zeus Ammon. Instead of short-finned dolphins, they will have swift horses, and reins instead of oars, and they will drive storm-footed chariot teams. That token shall make Thera the mother city of great cities, the token which once, beside the outflowing waters of Lake Tritonis, Euphemus received as he descended from the prow, a clod of earth as a gift of friendship from the god in the likeness of a man. And Medea goes on to describe the context of that particular interaction. So what happened was, when the Argonauts reached the land, they came down from the ship, they disembarked, and they were met by what turns out to be a deity in disguise. And I don't think it's clear what god it is. It's some kind of god, maybe a local divine inhabitant. It's hard to say. But this god comes to them in disguise as a human person, because you can't just interface with the gods directly. That's the whole point of prophecy, by the way, is the mediation. And so this god in disguise approaches the Argonauts and wants to show them hospitality. Now, if you've stuck around this channel for a while, you know all about the rules of hospitality, but if this is your first time here, the long story short is that in ancient Greece, and later to a lesser degree ancient Rome, when someone shows up to your house, you exchange gifts with them. And the god in disguise didn't have a gift of hospitality to give to the Argonauts when they arrived. So he has to figure out something quickly to give them as a sign of, we can have peaceful relations. And there's nothing around, so he just reaches down and grabs a clump of the earth and presents the earth to them. Now, Medea interprets this as saying that this land, this earth that we are on right now is going to be special. And that someday, in her interpretation in the 4th generation, that land is going to be colonized and that colony will produce a later colony in Cyrene. Are we following? It's a little convoluted. So in the 4th generation, that land is going to be settled, and then those settlers are going to do great things. And that's what it means that this god gave us this piece of earth. And Medea tells them, take this piece of earth and put it in the ship and guard it with your life because it is a divine sign and you need to take care of it. So of course the Argonauts mess it up and the clod of earth ends up slipping off the boat somehow and falling into the sea. And this delays what Medea had prophesied. So the 4th generation comes and goes and nothing happens. But in the 17th generation, that's when Thera is founded by Bacchus. And that's the prophecy that we get at the very beginning of the poem that the Pythia, along with Apollo, gives about Bacchus. And again, Bacchus is the ancestor of Arcesilaus, who this poem is dedicated to. So all of this is meant to honor Arcesilaus and his family lineage. And so we see Medea, much like Orpheus interprets the sign of the serpent in the desert, Medea interprets a sign and understands what the gods are trying to say through that sign, and she's able to translate that so that the Argonauts understand, even though they mess it up. At least they can understand what she's trying to say. So I think we'll stop there. Of course, prophecy permeates this story so much that we could go for another hour if we wanted to cover every example, but we'll stop there. The main thing I want us to understand about prophecy in the ancient world is this role of the mediator. You have the divine realm that must be translated in the Orphic Argonautica. Your divine speech came into my mind and it came out of my mouth in a way that humans can understand. The divine is up here. There's the layer of interpretation, which is where the prophet, seer, poet, bards live, and special magical practitioners and descendants of Helios. And then you have ordinary people who can't understand the will of the gods, and they need these mediating figures to help them. So with that, we reached the end of this video. Thank you all for watching. I hope that this was useful and interesting to you. If it was, you can let me know by leaving a thumbs up, and as always, I would love to hear what you have to say about this in the comments. We'll keep going with Medea next time. I'm not 100% sure which topic we're going to cover, but it's going to be something supernatural, magical, dark and spooky for Halloween season. In the story of Jason and the Argonauts. So be on the lookout for that. And until then, thank you again for watching. I really appreciate it. And I will see you next time.